10 disturbing practices that were considered normal in medieval England. When referring to the Middle Ages in England, one is most likely to think of epic tales with gallant knights riding through the countryside on heroic quests. One may even think of beautiful maids and noble princes. However, the reality of life back then was harsh, with little to no comfort. Women were subordinate to men, children had extremely low survival rates, hygiene was more than just questionable, and lifespans were low. There were many aspects of life in medieval England that are unknown to most people, and would be surprising, at the very least, to learn about. 1. Trial by ordeal. Before England started employing juries to determine the guilt of the accused brought into courts, they turned to literal ordeals for those who wanted to prove their innocence. There were two common forms of ordeal: fire and water, and one less common form: combat. God was considered to be the ultimate determiner of the accused guilt or innocence. For ordeal by fire, the accused was required to carry a red-hot iron bar and walk a distance of 3 meters, 9 feet. If their wound healed within the next 3 days, they were innocent and free to go. However, if the wound festered, they were guilty and punished. Alternatively, for the ordeal by water, the accused was entirely submerged in a pool of freezing water. The individual was attached to a rope that had a knot tied in it a long hair's length away from them. If they sank in the pool up to the depth of the knot, they were deemed not guilty and pulled out before they drowned. However, if they floated, they were deemed guilty. Ordeal by combat was less common. As the name suggests, it required the accused to engage in combat with the accuser. The English believed that God would side with the moral victor, and would help them emerge as the winner of the combat as well. Other ordeals included ordeal by hot water and ordeal by the sacrament. The former required the accused to retrieve an object from a pot of boiling hot water with their bare hands, while the latter required the accused priest to consume the wafer of communion. Whether they were able to swallow it or not, without choking, determined their guilt or innocence. 2. Taking animals to court. Back in the Middle Ages, domesticated animals like cows, goats, pigs, horses, and dogs were often subjected to the same legal proceedings as accused humans. These legal affairs were dealt with the utmost somberness, adhered to strict legal procedures, and treated the accused animals as if they possessed moral agency similar to that of humans. According to scholars who have academically studied these trials, the people of medieval societies believed in a divine order of being, with human beings at the top. According to his divine hierarchy, any disruption within it called for a formal restoration of said hierarchy. Therefore, the animal trials were likely meant to intimidate the animals' owners and encourage them to keep them in control. 3. Clown shoes and a plague of bunions. One of the oddest fashion crazes that swept through England during the Middle Ages was that of extraordinarily long-toed shoes with tapering points. These shoes were adorned mostly by members of high society, even though they were known to seriously injure the feet of those who wore them. According to English and Scottish scholars, high society statement footwear toed the line between fashion and injury. The rise of elongated shoes in late medieval Cambridge led to a sharp increase in hallux valgus of the big toe or bunions. The same studies found that out of the 177 skeletal remains that were exhumed from burial sites near Cambridge, over 27% buried in the 14th and 15th centuries had suffered from bunions for most of their lives. 4. Building toilets within palace walls. Most privy chambers in castles were built in a way so that they protruded out from the walls, with their openings hanging above open air. A wooden bench typically separated the stone-carved hole from the user's bottom. The room in the castle that was used as the latrine was known as the garderobe. The toilets within palace walls served the additional purpose of offering hindrance to potential enemies. Since these toilets with shafts emptied waste into cesspits around the palace, potential invaders were kept at bay due to the piles of excrement. For castles that were not built close to rivers and seas, the waste needed to be removed or mixed in with the surrounding moat. 5. The Assize of Bread. In the medieval world, bread occupied a central part of the people's lives. Therefore, the government needed to ensure that the price of grain did not rise over a certain limit. The Assize of Bread was introduced in the 13th century to enforce price controls for bakers. According to this new law, every individual would be permitted to buy at least some portion of bread for a penny. The size of this portion would be adjusted annually in accordance with the price of grains. Bakers would often attempt to sell bread that did not meet regulations by inserting dirt, chalk, and even iron bars in it to increase its weight, but the system itself lasted for over 5 centuries. 6. Drainpipes within sculptures. Gargoyles were some of the most common sculptures found in English architecture. While most people believe that the English in the Middle Ages believed them to dispel demons and bad spirits, they actually served a utilitarian purpose of water drainage. The gargoyles were essentially carvings that jutted out from the walls of buildings, designed specifically to drain rainwater away from the walls. There was a system of channels and pipes that funneled rainwater toward the pipe within the gargoyle, which exited from the gargoyle's mouth a foot or more away from the line of the wall. 7. Shaming parades. Even though mob justice through public shaming is still practiced today, it was a lot more creative and brutal in medieval England. One source talks about how in one instance, 2 individuals who had smuggled pigs into London were forced to ride through the streets with a carcass around their necks and a garland of pigs' feet over their heads. Tarring and feathering was also commonly practiced. The accused was stripped, slathered with tar, and rolled in feathers before being paraded around in the streets. In some cases, the accused would be sent to the stocks, while the public rained rotten food, bricks, and stones at them. 8. No surnames. Back in the Middle Ages, communities in England were small enough so each member was identifiable by a single name. Over time, it became necessary to identify them further, but even then, people did not have any official surnames. They were simply given last names that described their most easily identifiable attributes, for example, William the Short, John the Butcher, Roger son of Richard, etc. Over time, people's trades, places of origin, nicknames, and fathers' names started to become their fixed names. It was not until the 1400s that most English families began to use hereditary surnames. 9. Illegal football and mandatory archery practice. Mob football gained extreme popularity in medieval England. It was played by an unlimited number of players, the ball was a pig's bladder, and there were almost no rules to control the players. The sport became so destructive and rowdy that it was eventually banned. At around the same time, laws were introduced to make archery practice compulsory. These laws were meant to ensure that enough Englishmen were professionally trained to use the longbow, a weapon that was crucial for the English for many centuries. This requirement combined with prohibitions on other games, like mob football. Over time, the archery requirement was extended to all men below the age of 60, while the list of banned games grew so that they would not get in the way of archery training. 10. Surgeon/dentist barbers. In medieval England, the guilds of barbers, surgeons, and dentists were combined. Barber surgeons were medical practitioners who performed surgery mainly on the wounded from the war. They learned their trade as apprentices to more experienced colleagues, but most of them had no formal learning and were illiterate for the most part. The red and white pole that is so commonly placed outside barbershops today originally reflected the blood and napkins that were used to clean up during bloodletting, which was one of the main duties of barber surgeons. The colors red and white were reminiscent of the rags and blood that were used during bloodletting, so the poles were put up outside barbershops to indicate that they provided those services. They also practiced enemas, selling medicines and surgeries alongside cutting hair.